AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Welcome to the AI in Action podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus International. Today's guest is Clemens Viernickel, CEO and co-founder of SiaSearch. Clemens, very good to speak to you today.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background, and then I'd love to know a little bit more about SiaSearch and how it actually got started.
So SiaSearch is a company I co-founded in 2019. It's a data management platform designed for computer vision data sets, which just helps engineers spend a lot less time handling data. But let's maybe start with the first question. So I'm born and bred in East Berlin, and I kind of grew up more as a developer. Started coding very early on. That was more in the 90s and 2000s, so it was mostly websites. However, then I shifted my interest and ended up studying economics, politics. I studied in Switzerland and Paris. And I always kind of had these side hustles building some apps that never really took off, and then eventually kind of got back into the tech world after studying. I went on to work for Google in London in central strategy, and it was a quite interesting time. It's a pretty interesting unit that does all types of large scale strategic initiatives across the European region, from go-to-market, competitive intelligence, policy, tax, and you get a very good hang of how the company makes decisions, how kind of this big corporate apparatus operates. And I kind of got more of a, I would say, a consulting education, but also was very much educated with this type of data-driven decision-making. And this is also at Google, I kind of really was the first time I got in touch a lot with kind of machine learning and AI, which was then in 2015 starting to get hyped quite a bit. I was experimenting myself a bit. I was part of this transition at Google to AI first as a company strategy, and I kind of developed also this then fear of missing out. Kind of it revived my kind of intention to build something myself, do something more technical. And I then essentially got in touch with a good friend of mine, Rasmus, who started to set up Merantix in Berlin. Merantix is a company builder for machine learning companies. I believe Rasmus was on this podcast as well a while ago. And I loved the concept immediately. Essentially, the idea was to help machine learning research to transition better into industry. And there was a cool group of people very early on still. And Rasmus wanted me to help build up this concept. And I did this for a while. Was working actually on one of their projects in self-driving then. There I kind of first got in touch with the SiaSearch problem that we're now working on. So we're working with a big OEM. And it was super interesting to see how when we were working with them on kind of actually implementing computer vision problem, that they had a very hard time dealing with the data that was coming from the vehicle. So it seemed almost unimaginable to me that how much manual work went into dealing with this type of sensor data. And we built the idea to create a company that would make interaction with this type of sensor data a lot easier, and hence really improve and accelerate the development of machine vision. And then we're super lucky to convince Mark, who's now my CTO and co-founder, to join us straight off his PhD at ETH in Zurich. He basically did his work specifically on data-driven development for robots, pretty famous lab of Roland Siegwart, spent some time in Berkeley. And he was super excited to build something around this because he was feeling this problem firsthand and felt that there was a very worthwhile activity. And he joined in, and we started SiaSearch in mid-2019. And here we are.
Tell us a little bit about how the original problem that you were trying to solve has maybe changed, or has it got a little bit more complicated, or pivots, or tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I would say in the beginning, what we felt was so the companies seem to know very little about kind of like all of these type of like data that they were collecting. So there was just a huge this huge assets of data that they were like storing on the cloud or in some data centers, and it was like very difficult to say, like, just know what do they have, like, and it seemed like all of this data was sitting just idle on the cloud or on premise. And like our initial thinking was really about like, oh, we want to help the companies and the engineers use more of this data and retrieve it and understand what's in that data. So the core concept was starting to build around, okay, we should kind of like analyze this data and like create metadata around it. But however, pretty soon it became clear to us, like through our initial kind of like user interviews and customer conversations, that the actual problem that these engineers had was like that whenever they wanted to interact with these raw data assets, essentially the way to do it is to just download a batch of data and then look at it by hand. So you essentially didn't have an abstraction layer between the engineer wanting to work with the data and the data. So we are actually very used to abstraction layers. When we think of a normal database system, we work with it all the time, or with like something like Google search. So we just use metadata or semantics to look for information, aggregate it, etc. And like there's just no such thing for kind of like video data, image data, other sensor data coming from vehicles. You literally have to review it by hand. You can kind of compare the situation to as if you would like have a database and you could only query like for 10,000 rows at a time, and then you have to like look through it manually. And this is essentially the reality when people deal with frame data. That this seemed like crazy. So like we felt like the actual need here is to kind of like create really a place where engineers would be able to query this type of data, like to create this kind of abstraction layer between engineers and really connect them to raw data a lot more efficiently, and have them avoid spending all of this time with the actual files.
So when you look at the market and the views of deep learning and how it's evolved and changed, how excited are you about the future?
I think like I'm incredibly excited about the future and what's going to happen in machine vision. I think we're just we're seeing like just the beginning of really the broad application of computer vision and deep learning technologies. I think in the first few years of this hype, we've seen like kind of a lot of people trying it out. We've seen some verticals like in robotics and autonomous driving, who are really at the forefront, or in medical imaging, for example. However, like it's only now that like really these things like get into a place where like they are seriously considered to be used in production environments. So they're like moving to more and more companies. There's a lot more breadth that going on, and these things like starting to be used on a day-to-day basis. So we see just incredible potential to revolutionize like many different areas using image processing and computer vision. And however, I think like with all of this optimism to really like start seeing where all of this is going, and like it's seeing nice to like not just like Google and Facebook anymore, but really enabling companies across the board. I think like what is also striking is that progress in putting it into application has been like a lot slower than like we anticipated a couple of years ago. So like we're like a couple of years ago, people thought like, oh, this is going to be everywhere in a few years. Autonomous vehicles going to be everywhere. We're not going to have doctors anymore looking at pictures. We're not going to have quality control by people anymore in factories. And we see like all of this hasn't happened yet. Like we're getting there, but it's definitely like quite slow still. And there's still like a lot of work to be done to really make these models like do their job and like be as robust as we want them to be. And it's also fair that we have like really high kind of like thresholds for these things, that we like want these deep learning applications to be like really robust, and like actually even more robust than maybe like human perception, because they're really giving up like a certain degree of control, which like then also like is a higher bar for these kind of technologies. And like given the difficulty of developing like really robust computer vision and deep learning models, I think it's even all the more important, and this is like why we're so excited about like SiaSearch per se, is that we don't spend so much time on actually like handling the raw data. Instead, that we kind of like have the right tools at hand to really have people focus on tuning and building models, like you putting the expertise to work and not having them work on like a lot of repetitive tasks, like screening data frame to frame.
Clemens, on a bigger question, depending on who you speak to, different statistics gets bounced around. 87 to 90% of machine learning or data science projects don't make it into production. Depending on who you talk to, it's higher or lower than that. Quite a bit of hype out there. What's your thoughts? Any reasons why these applications don't actually make it into the world we now know?
So I think like the one thing, like one reason for sure is that using like machine learning or computer vision isn't for everybody as of now. So it's still like, while I see like there's a lot of potential, as I outlined, is it's still a lot of people, of course, like heard about, okay, there might be this great technology is going to solve this problem for us, and then they try it out, and then essentially like it's still a question of like, is this really going to be able to replace all of the kind of like other processes that we have set up? Is this mature enough to really go there? And then I think like a lot of people have like maybe overly heightened expectations of what it can do. So I think like we see a bit of a rollback of this can be like extremely helpful and extremely great in a lot of instances, but it's also not for every problem. So that's the one part. And the other part is like also more the side where we work and where we trying to help and improve this development, is that there's like many kind of difficulties that only really come up and become visible in deep learning development and computer vision when things move past this kind of like proof of concept stage. So because doing something on like a small and limited data set, like essentially like putting together a prototype showcasing that like something works in theory, that's the one thing. But like putting things into production creates like a crazy amount of like new problems, and like one of which is just the fact of like, okay, so if we want to run this in real time, is this just, do we have actually the right infrastructure to even execute this? But also more crucially, and where we are more active, like, okay, so if we want to do this like for real, we will need like really big amounts of data. And then like the first part is like getting that data, and then typically then the second big problem where SiaSearch works, like, okay, now we have all this data, and then people often think like, oh, it's like such a simple problem to essentially then just use all of this data. But it's not the case, because like for deep learning applications and image processing in particular, this is like a very different type of data. This is like very big, very heavy, it's unstructured data. So you can't just use it like this. So people always have this perception of like, when you have the data, then it's fine. But like data integration, building robust data pipelines, and building the tools to manage that data, understand it, cut it, slice and dice it, etc. All of this is like a lot trickier if you start with the kind of like assets that you have to put into deep learning models. And there I think like there's a big gap in terms of like what people expect to be possible, and then once they start seeing like what the actual requirements are to build these things like for real world applications, then there's a whole lot more to do to kind of like really make this possible. And there's like many opportunities and startups that they're going to be built just around this. So there's more and more companies now spinning up in the space of okay, like actually bringing things into production, dealing with the fields of how do we make this work on like really big pipelines, like what are, as we think about it, what are the biggest bottlenecks to actually like put together like a real efficient development cycle, and so on. And I think that's definitely like, but also like on this kind of like Gartner hype cycle, like that's also like, I think it's a good development. It's a lot of work, but it's essentially like what needs to get done to put these technologies to the next level. And it's okay that a lot of things fail right now, but now we essentially need to put the things in place to change it, and to build the right software and environment to make more succeed in the future, and then to have the technology adopted more and more across the board.
I think it's It's a really good summary of what you said. There's quite a few factors out of there. I think what I find in the market is dirty data, inaccessibility to the data, and
Yes.
working on the wrong problem that doesn't actually make impact, not having the buy-in from senior management. 6 months in, why is this taking so slow? Well, it's a pretty big job to be doing, and
Yeah.
then not being sold then afterwards in terms of I suppose it comes back to the problem they're working on isn't that impactful. It falls under the wouldn't it be cool snare, and that just gets a lot of people demotivated by the end of it. So there is quite a few challenges to overcome to get in. And unlike a typical engineering cycle, you can't just give somebody a Jira ticket and expect this to work in a very nice Scrum practice. You're dealing with research, and research is very hard to generate return on investment from it, and that's the beauty of it in some regards. My final question, where do you see the future of SiaSearch going?
We really hope that SiaSearch can somewhat like change a bit the way that engineers interact with raw data. So we really see this like huge potential that we just talked about of like more and more people need to interact with these raw data assets on a daily basis, because it's coming to more and more industries. It's starting from robotics and self-driving, but it's now going in many industries, and so many people like spend so much time on this. And we really want to say we want to establish like a way to interact with raw data that's like native and simple and fun and enjoyable for engineers, and really want SiaSearch to become somewhat of like the standard gateway for anyone building computer vision applications. Say like, okay, so if I have like all of these massive amounts of frames, this technology is the one that can help me access and understand the data a lot easier than doing it by hand. And I think like it's a bit of a changing of paradigms, because like today we really don't have kind of like this ability to have accessibility on the frame level when we talk about this raw data. And we kind of like want to establish that it is possible. It is essentially, it requires some tweaks, some different backend technology to make it possible. Really would love SiaSearch to become kind of like a go-to tool for engineers dealing with like frame level data sets. And I think like we're seeing some first great move in this direction, starting from our initial work in automotive and robotics. We are expanding to drones and agriculture and retail and many more industries right now, because we see this problem like to go broad. This is like really my hope. If you're listening to this and are interested to learn more, we have also public version on our website to check it out. I'd be super happy to chat about kind of how to get like larger computer vision data sets organized.
It's a very, very exciting journey ahead. My name is Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus International. You're listening to the AI in Action podcast. Our guest today has been Clemens Viernickel, CEO and co-founder of SiaSearch. Clemens, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, and it was a pleasure being there.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.